So it's another day here in New Haven, Connecticut. And although it might be night where you are, or cloudy or sunny, it's actually tomorrow in Australia. So sometimes time might be just a conception of man, and the present breath, the present reality might be our constant weather, whether it's cloudy or sunny or raining or storms. Um, In a few minutes, Rev.Dr. Frederick Jerry Streets, will be joining us. Reverend Streets and I met at the Yale Divinity School back in the early 1970s as students, and we've remained in touch. It's a honor and blessing to say we have remained in touch, communication and correspondence since that time. Um, he has a new book out. Former pastor of the Dixwell United Church of Christ here in New Haven on Dixwell Avenue, former chaplain here at the Yale Divinity School, currently and for a number of years, and he still is on faculty at the Divinity School. Also pastored at a Mount Airy Baptist Church in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Former alderperson when he was at the connected to the university. And by the way, when you're a chaplain the chaplain at Yale in particular, there's something called Dwight Hall. So you're not only ministering on Sundays, if you will, but you're also administering a social service agency called Dwight Hall, student run, but nonetheless under the auspices of the chaplain's office. It's been a pleasure to know Jerry, and he has a new book out. And this is fascinating for me, and he's been kind enough to make himself available. That he and I are at the age of serious reflection, and so to be able to kind of put your thoughts down on paper, if you will, and for people to kind of paper, if not papyrus, and for folks to kind of read it, just to share your insights about what this life is. To me, in terms of my journey, life is still pretty much a mystery. I might be necessarily just addicted to being naive, but it still is a mystery to me about why some things happen and why some other things don't happen. But again, that could be an expression of hubris in terms of wanting to be in control. So I think even when you attempt to uh, acknowledge your incapacities and your impotence, but also acknowledge your your will and your desire to be willful and, dare I say, lawful, but also legal, but also to have an impact or an influence, or to just even to be a good person. So I think what I'm trying to say is, regardless of your station in life and regardless of how society has bestowed upon you titles or jobs or careers, or in spite of how the external world might perceive your existence and and measure your productivity, your internal evaluation, I think, is really still the key. What is your internal evaluation? How do you judge and rate and evaluate yourself? Not to be overly self-critical or addicted to masochism, but how do you discern your walk? Are you walking the walk that you want to walk? Are you running the race that you want to run? Are you crawling? Whether you're crawling or walking or 200-meter dash or 100-meter dash or 10-yard crawl, this is a journey. So many of the shows we've done since 2015 have been to illustrate this journey, what we call life, and whether it has a particular destination or whether the destination is still mysterious to you moving forward. Um, People say enjoy the journey, embrace the journey, learn from your mistakes. So we have these various words to characterize our experience, and sometimes it again, I used the term mystery earlier. It's still much of this is still very much a mystery to me. So I'm just in a very mysterious mode, and I'm not referencing necessarily the upcoming election, our national election. I'm not referencing uh, who you might be voting for any particular primaries, but I'm kind of referencing just what is evil? Why can't we just as Rodney King and others have said, why can't we just all get along? And particularly in a nation that is the richest nation in the history of this planet. But again, that depends on how you define richness. But in terms of food and shelter and water and resources, we certainly have enough here in these so-called United States to kind of share with the world. So I'm not quite sure where this world is heading, and quite frankly, I may not be around uh, for many more decades to kind of reach that determination. But it's just I think this life interaction with people and your family and your job and where you work and where you want to school. This is just I'm using the term I'll use the term fascination. Um, and I think I am fascinated. I think I remain very much fascinated with with life and how we even define life or prenatal care or what's the embryonic nature of things or so. Reverend Streets will be joining us momentarily, and I just wanted to kind of give that extended introduction about him so that we could kind of jump right in and discuss his book and his journey and where he is these days. We won't bring up his golf game. That's a separate matter. People tend to elaborate on their success on the, the golf links, but we will kind of just take the deep dive for 45, 50 minutes um, about where he is at this stage in life. I think we hear this term wisdom a lot, and whether or not one can bestow wisdom upon another, or whether reading about other people's journeys is insightful or even inspirational. And that's for you for you to decide. But I'm confident that we'll hear from Reverend Street's uh, his thoughts, his ruminations, if you will, his um, and also his desires. Jerry is a very transparent person, and I think when you're in public life, there's a certain degree of transparency that's unavoidable. And the challenge is to combine your transparency with your authenticity. And Jerry is certainly a person of an authentic persona as well. So he's here now, and I'm just going to click and let him in, and we'll go from there. Reverend Streets,
Hey, Tom, how are you?
good man. I just gave a 5 or so minute introduction that you didn't hear, but that's because I didn't want you to be totally embarrassed. But
Okay.
I hope, but you'll hear it on the recording. But I've just mentioned how I'm so glad to kind of have the chance to. I'll use the term content commune with you for another 45 or 50 minutes. Do you have your book available there?
Hold on. Yes, I do.
So he's going to again, and my shows are not designed to promote anyone. It's really just to share the
Right.
sh sharing and caring. And I was just so pleased, Jerry, when you reached out to me about a week or so ago with really this I'll consider it to be exciting news. Now that might be a reflection of how exciting my life is if the knowledge of your book excites me. But I'm willing to go on record to say that I was excited. And that's why when I reached out to you, and so glad that you could respond so quickly. The title of
Well,
this,
I appreciate that, and we've been, you've been a friend for a long time, so I appreciate it.
And you know, the friendship is so key. The title of the books is what, Jerry? Let's hear it.
Well, it's called How Are You Being? Question mark BEING, Clergy Wellness in a Time of Uncertainty.
And let's see again. We can take the deep dive, so to speak, for 45 minutes, and give us a little background. I referenced in my opening remarks of your being chaplain at Yale and Mount Airy Baptist Church and Dixwell United Church of Christ and churches and yeah, even when you were in undergrad in the Midwest. So this religious impulse has been with you for a while. But what was there a particular stimulus? Was this kind of an arc before the manifestation happened? How did this idea kind of begin to really
No,
capture your
yeah.
mind?
Well, like all of us, I was coping with COVID-19, the impact of COVID-19, and I was at the time, I've since retired from being the senior pastor of Dixwell Congregational Church. But at the time, I was leading that congregation, and like all pastors, trying to figure out how to navigate quarantine and Zoom meetings and online worship and all that. Um, and so when we got to a more relaxed point of the pandemic, a year or two after the initial impact, I started thinking about how other clergy were handling the situation and what were they doing to take care of themselves as they were trying to also take care of their congregations.
Mm-hmm.
So that led to the idea of the book, and so I applied for a research grant through the what's called the Louisville Institute for Pastoral Studies for sabbatical grants, and fortunately I was able to get one. And what I did was selected and created a document, a survey to survey clergy in the greater New England area, from Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and with a battery of questions, not to get too much in the weeds of the scientific discussion, but I wanted to measure um, the mindfulness practices of clergy and their sense of well-being.
Mm-hmm.
So I had two scales that were created, made into surveys measuring their mindfulness, which I define, and their self-care practices. And then the results came back. I had over 400 people who responded to the
Mm-hmm.
survey, and the revelation, if you will, was that. Well, let me back up and first say that everybody's under stress, and people in the helping professions, be it ministry, uh, institutional chaplaincies, doctors, nurses, healthcare providers, um, there's a high rate of burnout,
Mm-hmm.
particularly amongst physicians, and so and nurses too. So the literature is there about people in helping professions, social workers like myself. I'm also a social worker, as you maybe indicated. um, have to really be careful how they understand their own needs and take care of them as they attempt to serve other people. So, with that as the larger backdrop,
Mm-hmm.
um, what I discovered was a few things that's very important. Number one, that we're still um, learning from the pandemic. People were clustered, sequestered, and a lot of self-reflection was starting to go on, and people started rethinking and who they were, where they were in life, what they wanted more out of life, that kind of thing. And this is no different for clergy.
Mm-hmm.
So so what I discovered, in addition to getting the 400 responses for the survey, I also had 10 focus groups made up of people who volunteered to become part of the focus group. So there was face-to-face discussion
Hmm.
as well as the data from the surveys. And so a number of things started to emerge. One, the more experienced clergy tend to also be older, um, had higher rates of practicing self-care measures and being mindful than younger clergy.
Hmm.
That might sound, well, of course, the older you are, hopefully you have more experience in dealing with stress and whatnot. But but in addition to that fact, as revealed by the results, there was very little communication or transmission of how the older clergy were coping and dealing with stress with the younger clergy.
Hmm.
So the younger people in the field weren't learning from the older folks about how to handle stress.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the third thing that's about it was that this whole notion of self-care has to be redefined and re um, redescribed and understood by both clergy and the congregation they serve, so that a self-care plan itself could be a part of their covenant or
Hmm.
contract.
Hmm.
So it goes beyond a 4 week or 2 week vacation and a few days off for a study break. Um, what the book recommends is that people really, that clergy and their congregations and the leaders of their churches really sit down and think through the different ways in which A, they could be more supportive of the clergy, B, how the clergy could be supportive of the congregation, also
Mm-hmm.
engaging in self-care. It's a two-way street, and how they measure that on an ongoing basis, and not just um, based on some kind of annual evaluation. So how that will look will depend upon the congregation, what a self-care plan looks like. But but it has to go beyond a 2 week vacation and a few study days, a year, to looking at health in all sectors of the pastor's life and in the congregation's life. How do they measure healthiness? What is a
Mm-hmm.
healthy congregation?
Hmm. Hmm.
And what is a healthy pastor or pastoral leaders? And how do you tell when things are not going well before they get to a point of crisis? And
Mm-hmm.
most importantly, in that atmosphere uh, of evaluation, is how do you create an atmosphere where it's not a judgment or condemnation to express vulnerability,
Hmm.
because a number of the clergy in the focus groups talked about being afraid to let their congregations know if they had needs,
Hmm.
because the assumption is that there might be something wrong. It's a false association that the clergy have needs and they're not good leaders.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it requires a different depth of conversation and a reimagining, a redefining of the healthiness of being able to be vulnerable
Mm-hmm.
and to get what you need in order to take care of yourself or to respond to the needs of the congregation and their response to you.
Jerry, you mentioned as you were talking, maybe five or six things come to mind. I mean, even for to receive those 400 or so responses, people often know that they may receive a survey. So that's a good yield just in itself to have 400 people express an interest in really working with you. Is it fair to say that even before COVID, this thought stream and this idea had been somewhat in your mind?
Oh yeah, because in the helping professions, self-care and burnout it's been a big topic for at least the last 10 to 15, if not 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we hear a lot of stories about difficult and problematic churches having conflict with their pastors, or the pastor having conflict with them. A lot of uh, unproductive and unhealthy behavior gets acted out in congregational life. So this has been an ongoing thing. And the corollary with this is also the whole discussion that's gotten to be very popular, at least in using this word trauma, the
Mm,
whole discussion about people feeling traumatized
mm-hmm,
um, through personal experiences with personal tragedy or with social unrest or a combination.
mm,
Pastors have had to respond to the trauma of their members.
mm-hmm,
And if you're not trained or have some basic skills in how to have a trauma informed ministry, that trauma can trigger trauma in you and
mm,
in the person
mm,
who is trying
mm,
to help.
mm-hmm,
So you had those kinds of issues going on, and then boom, we had a pandemic, and in the middle of the pandemic, we had the racial unrest and the murders of black people, uh, you know,
mm-hmm,
and that triggered anxiety and vulnerability in congregations, both black and white, and in ministers trying to meet the needs of people. So um,
mm,
the stress of the pandemic and the stress of the social unrest were contributing factors that over the last few years that people have had to really think about and how to cope with. And even in my own work during the pandemic, we had sessions with our church congregation via Zoom about self-care. And
mm,
um, I encourage the congregation to not watch, don't overwatch tragic news all the time.
mm-hmm,
And the political situation with all the tension and animosities that seem to have gotten vented uh, during the last person's administration, the former president, during that time. So there were a lot of triggers, you
yes.
know, racial, political, and then a global pandemic on top of all of that.
And Jerry, again, for someone that just tuned in, let's see the cover of the book, and it's on
Yeah,
Amazon, I'm assuming. When,
Amazon. Yeah, it's called How Are You Being? Clergy Wellness in a Time of Uncertainty. Although it's about the role of the clergy, it's for anyone because
yes.
the focus on how are you being is an attempt to separate being from doing.
Mm,
Um, we make the assumption that if a person is doing things well, according to whatever the criteria is for evaluating that they're doing something well meant that they were also well.
mm-hmm,
But that's not
mm-hmm,
always the case.
mm-hmm,
There are
mm-hmm,
people who are highly functional, who do their jobs well, but internally are in turmoil and stressed out. And the long term impact of stress and trauma can trigger all kinds of medical, physical, and emotional and mental health problems down the line.
mm-hmm,
So, what I wanted to get at with the clergy in these discussions and with these surveys was not about how they were doing, but how they were
mm,
being in what
mm,
they were doing.
mm. A key distinction. Talk to me about scaling up and your vision and what the response is that thus far. Are you going to be speaking to various conferences, or where do we go from here? You've never been a person just to kind of do something and not have it manifest and grow and expand and penetrate people's
Well,
consciousness.
I've done a few workshops about clergy self care um, and mental health, and hopefully I do those as I'm invited. But the three denominations that I've worked with to create the list of people to send to that is United Church of Christ, American Baptist, and the New England Episcopalian community, the Diocese of New Haven. I hope that they will um, make encourage all the clergy in those. I hope the 400 plus clergy that were in the survey would buy the book. But
Mm-hmm.
the other thing about it is, um, even though I sent out initially 1,100 surveys,
Mm.
From a statistical standpoint, getting 400 is a good yield.
Indeed.
But that also tells me that there were 600 people who didn't respond.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or a few of them, one of the groups told me, members of the focus group told me that they knew of a clergy person who started filling out the survey and they realized that they weren't in good shape and they couldn't
Isn't that
complete the
something?
survey.
Mm-hmm.
It triggered an awareness in them
Mm-hmm.
that things were not well.
Mm.
So so from a statistical research standpoint, the results are certainly valid and generalizable, as we say. But I hope that these three denominations, through their leadership, will promote and encourage people to read the book. It's a small book. I mean, it's not one of those thick, heavy things. I wrote it to be simple and lay language. It's only 93 pages, not 200 pages and that kind of thing.
Right.
But I also include in the back of it a sample protocol for self-care
Mm.
that people can adapt to
Mm-hmm.
their own personal life or to the congregation or both.
Mm-hmm.
And um, self-care practices, they're limitless things that people can do that self-care, but the thing that runs through any self-care practices or plan that a person has um, or is intentionality,
Mm.
awareness that you got to do it. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it's making unconscious stuff about needs. Now we all do basic stuff every day that we know that we need to do. You know, you got to get enough sleep, you got to eat properly, hopefully some kind of exercise. You know, we shower, we do the hygiene stuff without even thinking about it. But an intentional plan of self-care centers around daily monitoring, not in any obsessive way, but being aware of how you're feeling on all different levels, how you're
Mm-hmm.
feeling, how you're thinking, how you're behaving, and and being able to articulate what you need in order to find balance in your day-to-day life, and being able to then articulate that to people in your relationships, be it family or personal or professional. Because some people, uh, they have because of that vulnerability feeling, they don't want to go to their supervisor, their boss, and say, what we used to say often, I need a mental health day.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right.
Um, but you really have to be mindful and careful and intentional about having a self-care plan. Mindfulness um, is about awareness. That's basically what it means. Mindfulness, being aware of how you're feeling, what's stimulating the feelings, what's influencing the feelings, be they positive or negative, and then the self-care is actual things that people do. For an example, in the focus groups, this won't surprise our audience, but somebody had a regular routine of taking early morning walks. Somebody else
Mm-hmm.
went swimming every day or almost every day. Someone else did crossword puzzles or um, some kind of what we would activity that was mental but not absorbent or anything like that. But
Mm-hmm.
so there's the list is endless. Everybody has to develop their own plan, but the key is developing and acting
Mm.
on a self-care plan and being aware of what your needs are.
Mm. 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 I was in my opening remarks, Jerry, I mentioned the word discipline and discipline and discernment, and that kind of relates to what you're.
Right.
I also mentioned in the opening remarks I wasn't going to ask you about your golf game, so I'm not sure if that's part part of your
Oh, for me,
yours.
that's a part of my self-care.
All right. I also said I wasn't going to ask you how you're doing, but that we kind of embellish our. But doesn't matter whether you're a scratch golfer or a handicap, doesn't matter. Just get out there, right?
Yeah, yeah. And of course, in New England, when the golf season changes, you have to have an alternative.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Going to the
Mm-hmm.
gym or swimming or doing
Mm-hmm.
something else. But the key is to have some some kind of activity that you're very intentional about?
Weave in a little bit, and what I guess comes to mind is the when you talk about the context and burnout and ageism, et cetera, and the future of the church, someone that might be interested in going into the ministry, it seems to me that well, I mean, you're in touch with students that are already made a partial commitment, if not a full-time commitment to at the graduate school level. What would you say to a young person as you reflect upon your journey that might be sensing his or her desire to serve in this traditional ministerial context? What would you kind of say? Because as I talked to some folks, I've talked to some of our colleagues, and they've mentioned that when they were 10 or 11 or 12 or 8, when they found the call or later. But what would you say to someone uh, that's hearing, or it's being stimulated or being propelled to kind of pursue the ministerial vocation? At what would you kind of say to them? Because it seems to me as when we look at this chaotic world moving forward, that you and I might not be around for another 10 or 30 or 40 years, but I am concerned about how
Let's say 40. Let's start at
40,
the 40.
right. But I am kind of interested what your sense is. What would you say to some young people that are willing to, and when I say pick up the cross, I'm just being metaphorical here, not literal.
Yeah,
Uh,
students that I teach at Yale Divinity School, some of them are interested in and plan to pursue what we would call traditional ministries of pastoring a congregation in their respective denomination. But then there are other students who have similar values, but they want to express them in humanitarian work or
mhm,
working for agencies or organizations for social justice and not the traditional parish. So people can live out their sense of values and calls in a lot of different ways. If so, part of what I encourage people to do when they're beginning to explore that is to recognize that's they ought to be applauded for having that kind of interest, and that it's important to take time and to explore it in different ways so you can figure out where your niche might be. For an example,
mm,
somebody may be really a great pastor, but someone else might be better suited to be an institutional chaplain, a
mm,
hospital chaplain, or something like that. So taking time to discern what your sense of call is all about. You can do that by going to a divinity school. You can do it also. None of these routes are exclusive, but going to divinity school, talking to people in the field of practice already, and
mhm,
asking them about their journey and how they arrived at their sense of what they're doing and what are the strengths and weaknesses of their experiences. Uh, a kind of trite way of responding to your question is that I would encourage students to embrace the passion and learn where the poison is.
mhm, mhm, mhm,
uh, and the poison in any helping profession can be both structural evils, structural oppressions by the way in which the institutions themselves work, and or it could be something more internal to the person. Find out what your challenges are, what your shadows are, what your weaknesses are. So again, self-awareness
mhm,
is key. It parallels this mindfulness idea. Mindfulness is about being self-aware um, and knowing how to understand yourself well enough to do no harm
mhm,
in
mhm.
whatever field of practice that you want to go into.
That juxtaposition of the good and evil, or the dark and light, and just when you mentioned poison, my mind went to hemlock. So you do have these challenges. Uh, fascinating.
Yeah, I described in the book that self-care can be defined as the daily process of being aware of and attending to one's basic physiological and emotional needs, including the shaping of one's daily routine, relationships, and environment. Self-care is associated with positive physical health, emotional well-being, and good mental health. Now, the corollary to mindfulness is mindful self-care adds the component of mindful awareness. It is foundational work required for physical and emotional thriving. And so, um, people who to do no harm means to be aware of how one can be harmful,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
uh, as well as to do well. I was in a workshop, giving a workshop a couple of months ago, and it centered around my understanding, my notion of how we as human agents can be ambassadors for healing.
Mm.
So when I said that, people kind of looked up, and some people start hearing Twilight Zone music, that kind of stuff. I say healing. Oh, I'm not a healer. And some people have negative images of quote,
Mm-hmm.
healers, faith healers, people putting their hands on you, and people in crutches throwing away their crutches and all that kind of stuff. People are very suspicious of that. And there are people who unfortunately are charlatans in that regard. But healing can have so many different ways of we can understand it in so many different ways. Healing is not always the concrete um, uh, physical manifestations that we associate it with. So I was talking about uh, being intentional healers, and a person said to me, "Oh, I'm not a healer. I mean, if I am a healer, it would be God, as I understand God working through me. But I'm not a healer." I said, "Well, I appreciate your humility. I understand what you're saying. But let me ask you a question. You said that you don't believe that you can heal anyone, right?" The person said, "Right." I said, "Do you believe that you can hurt anyone?"
Mm.
Stuck. What do you mean? Oh, yeah, I can hurt people
Mm.
by what you say or don't say, by what you do. I said, well, why is it that you feel you have the capacity to harm, but you don't have the capacity to heal?
Mm. Mm. Mm.
And she said, well, what do you mean? I said, the word that you can say that hurts somebody, you also have the capacity to say a word that would help somebody.
Mm-hmm.
The way you are present with someone who's suffering could be helpful to them, as well as ways you can be present to someone and make them feel worse.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to, when you start
Mm.
unpacking
Mm.
the notion of being a healer, we're talking about relating to people, and particularly people in dire situations, in such a way that they feel that they're not alone, that they're not suffering alone, and that there's hope.
Mm-hmm.
And that can open up a lot of other possibilities.
Excellent, excellent. I like that a lot. I'm going to use that. I was thinking, Jerry. I'll write a footnote and give you some attribution. I was also thinking as you were chatting, it's been really so helpful. I'll use the term healing for me, even the last 25 minutes just to kind of chat with you. Talk about strengthening the loins. There's this metaphor, these stories about how the Bible helps to some of those lessons to strengthen your loins. It seems to me that you're riffing on that theme as well to some degree.
Well, if yes, but I hope I'm doing it in a way that highlights our need to be more humane and
Indeed.
more in touch with our vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
That that our strengths can evidence themselves more when we are aware of our weaknesses
Mm-hmm.
and learn how to use our weaknesses in a positive way. I really believe that it's my own personal posture is that we are reflective of the divine order of things. We reflect the creation. We reflect the creator, however you want to define the creator. Some people are religious, use religious language about that. Other people don't. Um, but I think we all have capacities.
Mm.
Uh, what we might call strength capacities, far more than we want to give ourselves credit for having.
Mm.
And that's why the analogy with the lady who happened to be a
Mm-hmm.
woman who said, "I'm not a healer," but she could see herself as a wounder. She can wound
Indeed.
people, but she can't
Indeed.
heal people. And that
Indeed.
and that binary is is a reality. But the reality of it is that we're both. We have the capacity to help, and we have the capacity to hurt. But we
Mm-hmm.
have far more capacity to help. Sorry, excuse me. We have far more capacity to help than we want to give ourselves um, credit for. So the more we are able to focus on, as the Apostle Paul says, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are beautiful, think on these things.
Mm.
In other words, focus, be
Mm-hmm.
mindful, be self-aware about the gifts that we can be to one another. That's not Pollyannish. It doesn't mean that you put your head in the sand and ignore the ugly and the evil, but you don't give the ugly and the evil more status than it needs to be given.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, don't feed that,
No.
that dark side, so to speak. Uh,
And one
excellent.
of the things, the discussion with the clergy in the focus group, the pandemic created a lot of downtime and a lot of self-reflection and all that, and people were getting more into reflecting on their life, their patterns, and whatnot. And one of the things that emerged out of this, which is part of the answer to my response, at least to your question, is the power of learning how to forgive.
Mm.
Forgive yourself and forgive others, and the power of putting the notion of regret in its proper perspective so that it won't be a um, an albatross around your neck.
Mm-hmm.
Forgiving yourself and forgiving others, and recognizing that there are times in our lives when regret is associated with something that we we wish we had done but didn't do. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's not having done something. That's different. Um, so you regret, but you have to learn how to let that go,
Mm-hmm.
because the lack of forgiving self and others, and the lack of unleashing regret. Think of it this way: if you're holding on to not forgiving and holding on to regret, that means emotionally, and some people would even argue physically,
Yes.
that means that you're holding on to something that's taking up space.
Mm.
And
Mm.
until you get rid of that, to clear that space, you can't put something else there. You got to
Mm-hmm.
you got to
Mm-hmm.
release it in order
Mm-hmm.
to receive, you know.
As folks know, my shows are live, and all of my guests, and Jerry, you've been on before, all of my guests have been receptive to the fact that this is not a rehearsed forum. Um, so my question is, Jerry, and this is not really a curveball or a forkball or a litmus test question, but it seems to me that in terms of the upcoming election in November, some people are still see some of their opposition, people that they're not going to vote for, as really being devil incarnate, part devilish,
Mhm.
evil. And so juxtapose or interweave what you just mentioned in terms of we do want to forgive. Should we forgive all people? Should we? I think you understand where I'm trying to come from here.
Yeah, forgiving someone. One way to think about it is healing from having been hurt means that you're no longer defined or defiled
Mm,
by the hurt.
mm, mm,
Your identity is no longer defined by that abuse.
mm-hmm.
And your sense of self, your sense of your the quality of yourself, your soul, your spirit is no longer defiled. It doesn't feel soiled
Yes,
by the harm that someone else did. Um, and you know, everybody is on a different road.
yes,
It takes time. And as you know, I had the privilege of working with Bishop Tutu in South Africa, and
yes.
he and his daughter have a wonderful book called the Book of Forgiving.
Mm,
And the reason why he calls it the Book of Forgiving is because forgiveness is a process. it's a it's so it's you're always learning how to forgive. It's not like forgive, period. Yeah, I forgive you, period. But it's I'm forgiving you
Mm,
over time, you see. And so it's a process. When it comes to this political situation that you mentioned, um, part of, for me, and when I said to my congregation when I was responsible to them, when I was a pastor, is that you can hold someone accountable for their behavior and call that behavior for what you think it is, right, wrong, evil, or not. But you don't turn the person that you're challenging into an object.
mm,
They're still a
mm,
human being. You don't allow their behavior to cause you to dehumanize them.
mm,
This is what Howard Thurman, Dr. King, and others have taught us, Jesus himself, and other philosophers and mystics, is that um, you can't you run the when you objectify someone else, you run the risk of losing your own soul
mm,
because you see them less than being human beings in spite of what they've done.
mhm,
See, so you still need to fight evil. You still need to do what you need to do to oppose it, and however ways that you feel led to do it. Um, but you don't objectify the people or the organization that you're fighting, um, and you recognize that they're human beings. But I'm like Baldwin in this James Baldwin said, you know, I'm paraphrasing. It's like whatever definition you have of something, as long as that definition is not dehumanizing me, that, that
mm,
we can have a disagreement about the meaning of something, but once how you see the world or define things causes my dehumanization, then you know I gotta that's where I draw the line.
mhm, mhm, mhm,
And no matter that, you know, old folks, I'm one of the old folks now, but when I was younger, you know, the old folks used to say, you know, this too will pass. That doesn't mean that you are passive about working for a certain cause, but it's recognizing that even the best of things come and go.
mm,
So do the worst of things. And all this animus that's, from my perspective, coming from certain political quarters, um, that too will pass. We'll get through it. But there are people in the wings of holding those same views who will
that's
come
right.
on the scene in another generation. So you
That's right.
can't assume that it's gone once and for all. And so you have to be
Yes.
vigilant.
Yes, indeed. We have about another 10 minutes up, but just
Oh, sure.
are you suggesting that when you mentioned Bishop Tutu and others that a truth and reconciliation or some form of that we're still in need of that being a policy or a program or an initiative or
Oh, yeah, I'm thoroughly convinced that uh, we're still fighting the Civil War.
mm,
It's just a different version of it.
mm,
Racial, when it comes down, you know, the Civil War was fundamentally wrapped around a definition of human beings as objects, slaves.
mm,
They weren't fully human. They were there to be used to support the economy. Um, so you have racism and political and economic exploitation. Those things continue to exist and manifest themselves in all kinds of ways. And so we're still addressing this even now. I mean,
mm,
when you hear people still debating about who is a citizen, who's not a citizen,
mhm.
who has rights and who don't have rights, these are the same arguments that were back during the during the Civil War era.
Jerry, take a little minute and read a little bit more. Choose two or three of the passages or themes or about the book as well, because and again we want people to purchase it or at least kind of share it. And so I don't want you to have to give us all the gold mine in there and the nuggets, but tease us a little bit more with some of the uh, themes or chapters or.
Well, again, hold up. It's called "How Are You Being? Clergy Wellness in a Time of Uncertainty," and a
Mm-hmm.
person can read this and substitute the word clergy for themselves,
Mm, mm,
um, and look at the kinds of things that people reported that helped them to survive the stress of the pandemic. The kinds of practices, food, exercise, diet, prayer, meditation, um, a lot of meditational practices, how to cope with strategies for coping with the stress, the
Mm-hmm.
importance of relationships, not just 50,000 people, but the importance of having uh, you know two, three, four, five good relationships are better
Yeah.
than having 50,000
Mm-hmm.
people in your life. And how do you nurture good relationships? And it's a reciprocal dynamic. They
Mm-hmm.
give to you, you give back to them. Um, but the protocol in the back, the sample protocol, is filled with suggestions of creating your own self-care protocol.
Yes.
So, so you create something around that create that helps you to be more empathetic, peer support if you're in a profession, uh, prayer, mindfulness, and meditation, and then self-care practices like food, diet, exercise, um, healthy environment.
Mm.
What can you do to make your external environment healthy? Because that influences your internal state. Think
Mm-hmm.
about it. If we've had images of people in jail cells, for an example. You got this cramped jail cell, but they have a little flower on the on the windowsill.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where in your environment can you make it more beautiful, make beauty a part of your life?
Mm-hmm.
Because it
Mm-hmm.
affects you internally as well as externally. And then how you go about evaluating um, your accountability to your self-care plan.
Yes.
Mhm.
And elaborate a little bit more because it may be evident, but not too evident. It's about the evaluating your self-care plan because I'm coming from the fact that or the possible sometimes we're so self-critical of ourselves and so judgmental of ourselves.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because evaluation can take on the tone of judgment. So if somebody has a self-care plan, let's say part of their plan is um, I'm going to go to the gym 4 days a week, no matter what, you know. And so one week they only make it one day, and then the judgment comes. Oh, you're not doing it. So being mindful of how the judgment is not part of your self-care plan,
Mm-hmm.
because that's it's putting yourself down. There may be very legitimate reasons why you couldn't make it, and or there could be substitute things. Well, I didn't get to the gym, but I can do 20 minutes of exercise in my bedroom at home,
Mm-hmm.
or I can write in a journal. And some
Mm-hmm.
people do journaling every day. In other
Yes.
words, there have alternative ways of attending to yourself, and don't down yourself when you don't do the initial plan. You can
Yes.
adjust it and then get back on track.
Yes. Uh, let me give you, let's take, as we wind down for the next 5 minutes, just what's on your, I'm tempted to ask what's on your heart, mind, and soul, but that'll be another 5 hour, 10 hour discussion and meetings, but we will come back. I will come back to you again. But as we conclude right now, and since you're not in the pulpit every Sunday, but your brain synapses, I'm sure, are still functioning. And I know you're probably taking care of the wife and she enjoys seeing you more often. Well, as we kind of conclude, what's on your as you look into your world crystal, your universe crystal ball, what's on your mind and thought and prayers or concerns as we kind of
Well,
wind
I'm
down?
trying to do more. I'm trying to do more thinking, and hopefully we'll do some writing around this idea that I mentioned earlier. I want to try to promote more of of us understanding of ourselves as human beings as healers.
Mm,
So
mm,
I'm looking again back at the work of Howard Thurman and other
mm-hmm.
people who had a way of coping with very demeaning life situations
Yes,
and coming out uh, with a sense of positive self. And then, but the goal is not it's not just to emerge and strengthen your own resilience and hope, but then how do you uh, translate and promote that in other people?
yes, yes, yes. Excellent, excellent. All right. Well, that's a wrap. I mean, that's you've You certainly inspired me. Just full transparency and authenticity. A lot of the things you're just mentioning, I was thinking about this morning. We were initially going to go on at 12, and then you mentioned that, or I had proposed that. You mentioned that chatted at 4, and 12 o'clock came around today, and I said, Tom, I'm so glad we did 4 because Tom is still tired. He still wants more, still wants to nap more.
Yeah.
He has to give into the body.
Now,
So just
pay attention to yourself from a theological perspective. I often say, even though it's a repetition in my sermons, that there's more grace in God than there is sin in us.
mm, mm,
And we just got to join our Creator as partners in that sense, and stop putting ourselves down so much.
mhm.
So self-care, if you need a nap, you need a nap. If you walk slower, you walk slower. Whatever it is, you need to get rid of that chatter voice that
Yes,
criticizes and makes you judgmentalism.
indeed, indeed. Jerry, thank you so much, man.
Thank you.
Onward and upward, onward and
Okay,
upward.
man. I look forward to the next time.